This Mizzen Meets is in honor of this special day called International Day of Women and Girls in Science, that's being celebrated on February 11th. So we're spending some time with the amazing Kam Green to talk about the science of positive self-talk and empowering girls in STEM. That's our time today. We're going to be talking about those themes. And so my name is Carlos Santini, CEO of Mizzen Education, and I'm part of an awesome team, a group of committed individuals who are big fans of youth development, passionate about this work, and we show that passion by designing, curating, and sharing teaching and learning resources on our Mizzen Education platform, free of cost, folks, at no cost. Back in my day, we used to say to kids when they entered our program, it won't cost you a dime, but it'll cost you your time. I know it's cheesy and it's corny, but I think I feel that way about folks who, about the Mizzen community. It's like, it won't cost you a dime, but give us your time. And so we're grateful that you are here giving us your time for this conversation. Obviously, like I said before, I want to thank Kristen and Haley for making this time possible, for looking at the broad spectrum of the youth development field and bringing great folks in, because that's what Mizzen Meets is. It's time to have conversations with really cool people in this field. So thank you, team, for making that happen. And also, before we dive in, I wanna know where you all are from. Where are you coming in from? Let us know where you're visiting from, what org you are a part of, or organization. And if you see someone that you know that is joining, give them a shout out. Say hello, because it's kind of cool. You know, we're all busy, so it's nice to have these times together when you go, oh, I know her or I know him, I know them, and so I'm here to say hi. Right. So yes, we're here to listen to a great conversation, but also it's cool to be able to say hello and give shout outs to folks that are joining. And before we really get into it, I do want to recognize and honor Black History Month, where we recognize the contributions throughout history, right? And the significance of Black Americans throughout history in the United States and their contributions to our society, to our technology, entertainment, to our democracy. And so we invite folks to come visit the Mizzen platform to continue to gather resources, use resources that can help elevate the roles and the lives of these amazing individuals that you can share with your students, with your community, with your program. So please visit mizzen.org to be able to sign up for an account and start using some awesome resources from folks like the Pulitzer Center and Jazz at Lincoln Center. There's one particular module from Jazz at Lincoln that talks about, and even a bit from the Pulitzer, about the contributions in the arts. And it reminded me of, if you all saw the Grammys and you saw that performance by Tracy Chapman, right? Oh my gosh, that was like incredible. Highly recommend it. Check it out. It was amazing. Okay, so here we are, folks. Now, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you saw that I said, try and guess what color frames that Kam was going to be wearing today. So here we are. I know folks had purple. I know our own Janine, who's on the line here, who's a part of the Mizzen team. I think she guessed yellow, or it's purple.
No, I said hello. I said purple, and I almost guessed orange. I should have said orange.
Oh, and by the way, this is not orchestrated. Kam and I did not talk to each other. I had a hunch she might be rocking orange. But Janine, good try. I think we also had someone say yellow, but hence we have orange. So Kam Green, with that style kind of that stylish intro. Welcome to our time at Mizzen Meets. So good to have you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here for this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And where are you hailing from, Kam, before we get into your work?
I am hailing from Las Vegas, Nevada, home of the
Yeah.
Super Bowl right now.
All right. Can you walk over and check out the Super Bowl? No? Can you?
Oddly enough, on the back side of my office, I can see straight across to the strip and all the planes landing and things like that. So if I wanted to, sure, right? I might not get let in, but
yeah, that's going to be the epicenter of the world, I think, right now.
yes.
I heard that someone bought a suite for $2 million to watch the game. So
Oh,
it is
wow.
out of control. So you're in an amazing place right now. It's the center of the sports and entertainment universe. So, hopefully you can get around okay without a bunch of tourists getting in your way. But Cam, welcome, my friend. It's really an honor to have you. I've been following your work, and I've been really kind of glomming onto some of the concepts around positive self-talk, identity work, and I've been watching your cool conversations and just the kind of like breaking the fourth wall, kind of like style of you talking right to us from your social media account. So I appreciate the simple approach, the practical approach, the effective approach. So besides though you having the cool glasses, we know you've got an amazing journey from becoming a C-suite executive and author, storyteller, STEAM advocate, and positive self-talk pioneer. Tell us a little bit about that journey, how you ended up there.
So interestingly enough, I started my work in after college in arts education. And so I was working for an arts education program in Chicago that basically the big part of it was to get students in urban areas into the arts. So getting them tickets, getting them artists in residencies and making that connection, because that's an important part about youth development. And after that, I actually went into a little bit of an entrepreneurial endeavor, actually in fashion, if that might surprise you, might not.
Makes total
And then
sense.
after I closed that down, actually, I found myself in the space of after school and worked for a charter school in Washington, D.C. that was just starting up. And it was this eye-opening, amazing experience to say like, oh my God, there's so many things that we can do in the after school space, so many things we can bring there. And then it also made me think about that I was a product of after school. It made me think about and make all those connections of how I was in YMCA, I was getting the scholarships, I was going to these free programs, and they were shaping, who I was. So I've done lots of things over the last 20 years, but after school is always at the epicenter. I'm always trying to bring it into the corporate space, to this space, because I feel like it's so critical. And along the way, in the peaks and the valleys, I grew up poor. I had to close businesses. I've, most recently going through a divorce and things like that. Somebody asked me maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and they're like, "Why are you like this? Why are you the way you are?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And then I was able to clearly identify to them, and I'm like, I don't speak negatively to myself most of the time, right? I'm like, I am an advocate of positive self-talk. I'm an advocate of productive talk. I'm not beating myself up when I fail. I'm acknowledging it. And then I'm saying, okay, now what? How can I pivot? And so that became me really getting laser sharp focus on identifying and naming that as a skill and as a tool that is free, which I love, that you can use, and it really can elevate you. So it's not this existential thing. It's like, if you practice this and if you use this, it can help you to shift. It can help you give you perspective and pivot. And then in terms of the STEAM related work, about 8 or 9 years ago, I started a program called Junior Docs. And funny enough, I failed college chemistry, and it was the only class I had to go back and take post-graduation. I was given my degree, but I had to go back and take chemistry that summer to actually, for it to be conferred. But I started the program not as a science person, but one, hearing too many people say, I'm not a science person, I can't do this. And I'm like, this is the area that if we can break through in the mindset and the positive self-talk and have people think, yes, this is hard, but if I practice it, if I get support, if I break down the concepts in smaller bite-sized ways, I can be good at STEAM. And so again, it wasn't me being this science person. It was me saying, I can't continue to hear people say, I'm not a science person, I can't do this. I'm like, sure you can, so that's kind of how I started that program. And so it's about building science sense, but it's just as much confidence. It's like you come across this hard word, you come across this complex topic, and I worked with a lot of people who were in medical school during this time. When I first started this, just to kind of get some ideas about like, hey, what are you working on? What are you coming up against? And a lot of it was that same thing. How can I break down these concepts? How can I break down these hours of studying and things like this? And if you don't have that positive self-talk to tell you can get through it, those are the people who drop out. Those are the people who don't show up. Those are the people who, if they fail, they're likely to not get back up. So that's a little bit of my journey and how the science was woven in. I'm not science, based by trade. And in fact, in college, I failed it. But I came back around and entered in a space where I'm like, I can break this mold for myself, and I can help youth especially attack this topic.
Yeah. You shared a lot in there. There are two things that stood out. And I say this about out of school time, and you could say the same for summer learning, which is we are like the innovation arm of education, right? This is where we can tinker. This is where we can push up against this fear of failure, and be less risk averse and really go after innovation, and how not only as educators we facilitate, but how we set up the environment for young people to absorb and participate and own the learning experience. So you talk about your real elements of almost like a lab in the education space, but you also talk about life experiences and how that guided you to make the decisions as a professional that you're making today. And oftentimes, folks in our field discount life experience.
Mhm.
They go, I went through that. I don't want to bring that into my career now because it doesn't it doesn't align with what people envision being successful and whatnot. So you talk about life experiences being a big part of who you are today and what you're doing today. So really thank you for being vulnerable. And for the audience, when you hear stuff here, because yes, Cam is the star, but the audience, you are the co-star. So let us know what you're thinking, what questions you have. We're going to get into a little bit of a Q&A a little later. So I will lean on you, the audience, to ask some good questions. I'll come in with stuff if I feel like it's a little quiet because I got questions. All right, don't worry about me. But it's really about you. What do you have that you want to ask? So let's get into positive self-talk. You mentioned it. You're an advocate. That is how you lead. Your organization is based on a lot of those concepts. So break it down for us. What is positive self-talk about? What is it and why does it matter to us? And why should it matter?
So positive self-talk is having, to me, I'll use it interchangeably, a productive conversation with yourself. So it's not always just like what I say. It's not everything's okay when it's not, right? So I'm not, that kind of person. It's everything's okay, everything's not okay, but, right? It's opening that door to what's next and open the door to possibility. And speaking of positive self-talk in science, the way that we speak to ourselves actually does affect our brain. Our brain is an organ and we can actually train it just like we learn anything else. If I ask anybody in here their first name, you would be able to say it pretty quickly, right? If I ask you your phone number, you'd be able to say it pretty quickly. Maybe not somebody else's these days, but you can say those things fairly quickly, but that's because you practiced it and you memorized it and you learned it. So now it's on autopilot, it's burned into your brain, you've, reshaped the neurons and it's right there. It's just coming out. You're not having to think about it. Like I'm not thinking about these words that I'm saying. Same way with positive self-talk. If you practice it as a habit, when something goes wrong, say I knock this water off over on my desk and it spills on everything, my first thought is likely going to be something productive. Oh, let me clean this up. What can I save and things like that. Versus someone who doesn't practice that, the first thought that's going to come to mind is a negative thought. And this is what happens. Negative thoughts are normal. And actually, science says anywhere between 60 and 80% of our thoughts are negative as they're filing through during a day. But what happens is you get the negative thought. Do you stay on it? You stick with it? And do you have historical data of so much more negative things that take you down this spiraling path of destruction, right? Versus I knocked the water over. That's okay. I can clean it up. I can reprint this. I can do that, and shifting you into a different space. So if you practice positive self-talk, when you get up against something negative, hard things and things like that, your brain, if you start to reprogram it, it's going to be on autopilot to give you, oh, here's a possibility. Here's an idea. Here's a thought. Yes, I failed, but I failed before. I can list, we could spend this whole time talking about all the failures I've had, even this morning, right? But what allows me to move beyond that is to learn from it, one, and two, even compare myself to other failures and things like that people have had, and say, we can get beyond this, we can go past that. So it is something that you have to practice and it is something that you have to use and it is a habit. And a lot of people I talk to, they're like, Cam, I want to be more positive. I wish I could be like that. And I'm just like, it's not a one and done. I've been practicing positive self-talk since I can remember. Like people who knew me when I was younger, they're like, yeah, you've always been positive since I was like 7, right? So the idea is not that I say positive things on Monday and then never revisit it. And then Saturday, I'm turning over tables at a soccer tournament, right? That, it's something that you have to include in part of your day and you have to include what works for you. The positive self-talk that I say to myself may not be the thing that works for you. So what are those productive statements? What are those progressive statements? And they might be questions. What do I do now? Who can help me? Where can I go? How long this might take me? So it's not just like, everything's awesome. Yes, I got this. I definitely say that. But it's also, if that doesn't work for you, that's not positive self-talk, because it's not impacting you in a positive way. So I always like to tell people you have to find the words that work for you, the productive reasoning that works for you to pull yourself out. In the same way when we think about kids, we can give them options, but we also need to say, does this work for you? What do you think? What do you feel? And start to pull out what really helps them to move on. I was talking to my daughter this morning. She was running late for school and she was really upset.
Mm.
And I was trying to pull out and I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, I understand. I did my best to try to get out of here on time. I'm like, what's causing this angst? And she was like, well, when I get to school late, I got to go in. And then everybody's looking at me in the class. And then I'm like, aha. So I'm just like, oh, I'm like, thanks for sharing that. I'm like, I'm sure that it sounds like it might cause stress. So we kind of start to talk through that. And I said, how long does that usually last for you? Like when you go in, you walk into this space and you feel, stressful, or you feel like nervous. She's like, I don't know. I haven't been late. It hasn't happened. And I said, okay. And I said, so you're preempting like this feeling and you think that's what's going to happen. And I said, I'm sorry, I'll give you some tips and maybe just try to walk in quickly and breathe. I said, but I really am going to talk to you afterwards. I want to know when you walked in, how did you feel and how long did you feel that way? And then we can talk about some tools for next time, because it's all about when you enter a space where you're dealing with something negative, you have an issue or you have a problem, 9 times out of 10, that thing's coming up again, right, in your life, right? It may look a little bit different. So do you pause and stop to see, this is how I felt, bad, negative, anxious, whatever. How can I show up differently the next time? How do I want to feel differently next time? So it really is a practice. It really is being thoughtful about creating the habit and making it work for you. My daughter going in and saying like, hey, she's not going to do that. I would,
I can
and
see that.
so
I can see that.
so, but I just had to meet her in her space and kind of dig in and say, okay, what's going on? Why is being late such an issue for you? It was like 1 or 2 minutes. And then I was able to say, oh, I get that. I understand
Uh-oh. Got a little bit of a freeze, folks.
that. So I felt and see how long it lasts. I was feeling that.
Yeah, you're chopping up a little bit, Cam. So let's see. While she's kind of buffering, that's the old school kind of term for videos as they kind of catch up. What we're hearing folks, Cam, talk about is the idea that positive self-talk is, first of all, it's a habit. It's a habit. Second of all, it takes practice. And third of all, it's not necessarily, there's a little bit of self-awareness and yeah, we'll see. We'll have her jump on in a minute. There's a sense of self-awareness and a series of questions that you have to ask yourself. And I love what Kendra said earlier in the chat around about positive self-talk being about affirmations. And these are not necessarily empty words. The idea is for affirmations to be able to have teeth and change behavior and in many occasions outcomes. I think for me, I mean, I wrote a blog back in November that talked about the idea of positive self-talk in a different light. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit. But Cam, welcome back. I was just kind of breaking it down, in terms of like summarizing some of the elements of positive self-talk, which is, first of all, it's a habit, right? Second of all, it's a learned behavior. You have to, and it's not easy. It doesn't come natural. And it's interesting what you're sharing, because when we make a mistake, that mistake can repeat and live rent-free, like the young folks say, right? It can live rent-free in our brains for a long time. While at the same time, accomplishments, they stay with us for a little bit and then we move on. Like we kind of shelve them. And oftentimes it takes a lot of reflection for us to remember the successes. But mistakes, they live in our mind over and over again. And so what you're saying, that scientific research proves that we are more prone to negative self-talk rather than positive. We're not saying let's throw away the things that are that we need to deal with and engage and confront, but there should be some sense of balance and equitable thinking. Don't give every spot in your brain to negative thought. Find balance. So for folks, Cam, who are coming into this new year, right now we're in February. I mean, good night. The year's going to be over before we know it. But they're coming in excited. January has passed, and research also says that a lot of resolutions and plans fall apart pretty much towards the end of January. So if folks had this vision of, I'm going to have a more positive outlook, I'm going to be a lot more proactive and being optimistic about my future, my work, feeling great about what I do, who I am. If that has trailed off and some of the failures are creeping in and the stuff is starting to pile up in our minds, how can folks get back to positive self-thinking to just be healthy and whole and get back to their initial plans of the new year of having optimism, positivity, and throwing out some of that negative attitude?
That's a great question. And I think you made a great point to say that, a lot of people think that it's automatic and that it should be on autopilot and that you shouldn't have to practice it. And that's not the case, right? Just like with everything else, we have to do that. One of the easiest ways that I will say is if you do not have reminders on your phone, which I have a little reminder there. I don't know if you can see it. It's a quote on there. Set a reminder on your phone. You can have it at multiple points during the day that pop up, and it could be that quote, that rephrasing, that questioning, that whatever, and it just pops up. A lot of mine say like, did you do this? Think about this. I have one that says, yep, you got that. This is very simple. And sometimes I look at it and I'm like, I do, I needed that. So some things we do have to put on autopilot in terms of technology, and we can utilize that as a resource when we don't have the strength or capacity to be saying it. Getting that reminder and reading it, that's practicing. It's just like learning a vocabulary word or something like that. So I would encourage everyone to put, if it's the morning, the middle of the day, or the night, put some kind of reminder on your phone so you get it. Put it on your work calendar so it shows up as a pop-up. That way it takes a little bit off of you, and then you're reminded every day it's going to come up. And at least if it, for no other time period, when that pops up, you read it and you take a moment, you take a second, and honest to God, it does matter. And if you put that on for 365 days a year, you can say, you know what, for 365 days, I practiced that quote. I was reminded of that. It's not about being perfect. It's not the expectation that you won't have those negative thoughts and you won't respond in a way that's not favorable. But it is about having that thing that's on the cycle to retrain and to reprogram. And like Carlos said, science says we lean into the negative, even the news, and help them, but they're in that business. The cycle shows that we will stay on negative news longer than we will a positive news. We hope to get away from that, in years to come. So how can you how can you get into that positive framework? Surround yourself with positivity, surround yourself with positive things, have a positive playlist. That song that they played in the opening, Lovely Day, is on my playlist in the morning. It's how I wake up my kids. When I get in the car, it connects, it comes on, and I share it with people because it is something that's on autopilot. I cannot be mad when I hear that song. I cannot be angry, when I hear that song. It just does something. So what helps you? I always ask people, what helps you thrive? Do you have an identifiable list? Is it water? Is it music? Is it breathing? Is it working out? What helps you thrive? You need to be very clear on that. And how can you get more of that into your day? If it's working out or moving, don't set unrealistic expectations. If you can't work out for 5 hours a week, say, I'm going to walk for 2 minutes. I'm going to take a lap around the office, because that's the other thing, Carlos, when it comes to resolutions and plans. Sometimes we set this massive expectation to do all of these things and to get them done in short amount of time, right? So when we fall off, it's hard, right? Because we're like, oh, I was going to do this. And the other part is comparison. Comparison is the thief of all things good, right? Except for when you're comparing prices at the grocery store. I love to do that.
There you go.
But oftentimes we'll compare ourselves to other people's journeys or what they're doing or how they're feeling or how they're operating, how they're moving along. And that will cause you to have an imbalance that is just simply unnecessary. We must keep reminding ourselves that we are humans, we are individuals, our brains are different, the way that we show up are different, our needs are different. But if you don't have that clear, identifiable, this is what I want, this is what helps me, I feel happy when this brings me joy, you just kind of, as much as you feel like you're in control, you're not, just kind of floating along, So I would encourage people to write those things down and have that on top of whatever you're trying to do, and then set those little reminders. Hey, you need to take a breath. Hey, you love a 2-minute walk. Time for whatever it is, put that out of your brain and have something where it's kind of coming back to you. And that will keep bringing you back a little bit, right? And helping you make those little steps of progress.
Yeah, and I think what you've done here is you've gone beyond the positive self-talk discipline, and you're talking about ways to thrive. And Sheila just shared that she does 7-minute walks every day. She sets up those breaks so she can reach her goal of a daily goal of walking time. So there is an element of thriving in positive self-talk. And this is a cheesy tip and trick. And so I'm going to share this with you. But I think Haley asked earlier, what do you folks do to remind yourself of your worth, of your talents, of your accomplishments? And look, even of ways that you want to grow. Because, and you're hearing this here first, I've never said this before, but if you ain't writing it down, it ain't going down, right? So you need to write it down, or you need to be able to see it. And this is a cheesy thing that I do once in a while, but I keep my greeting cards, Kim. I keep my greeting cards, like birthday cards, anniversary cards, yeah, I keep them around. I have this, and I have this little birthday note that my daughter wrote me a few weeks ago. And once in a while, I'll read them. I'll read them because talk about positive self-talk, right? I mean, who's going to write you a greeting card that tells you how bad you are? Right? I mean, it's going to be positive. So sometimes it's even hard for me to read the cards because I go, is that me? Are they talking about me? Am I seen that way? Am I heard that way? Is that the type of relationship people have with me? Because when you're down in the dumps and you read something that says, you're incredible, we couldn't be here without you, or, you bring me, you do this in my life. When you see those things in greeting cards, you're reminded that you're loved. Because other folks have positive self-talk for you, especially during COVID, right? We isolated and we didn't necessarily always hear and connect with people and had those positive affirmations from others. So, folks, what other things do you do to write down the positive self-talk that you should be listening to, that we should be listening to? Kim, and we talked about the celebrating International Day of Girls and Women in Science as a celebration on February 11th, and adjacent or akin to positive self-talk is this concept of identity, right? And so for me, that's been a big part of my own personal and professional development, especially as an immigrant to this country, is to have a strong sense of identity, so that my work can be an extension of who I am. So I keep to my values. What is the relationship between identity and positive self-talk? Is there a relationship there?
Oh, there's a huge relationship. And like you said, it's so important that, for you, you have a clear understanding and you were able to say how you wanted to show up, parts of your background, parts of the way you want to show up. And that helps you to be centered, and it helps you to kind of, value, to show up in your value state, but also to think about what matters to you, what doesn't matter to you, what's important to you, what's not important to you, and also to deflect some of that comparison of how other people are showing up. What you identify with and solely firmly say, this is how I identify, this is how I want to show up, as this person. When you settle and rest in that, you're going to be building upon, okay, based on this, the identity that I've set, what do I need? What do I need to pour into myself? What do I need to speak into myself? How do I want to show up and how do I want to operate based on this center? So having an understanding of your identity creates that base. Okay, I'm sitting here. Now what? When you don't have that, like we said, it's the flopping around, and it's that flailing thing they usually have at the auto places. And a lot of people live, their lives like that. And especially when we work in youth and youth development, that's literally what we're trying to help them to cope is, what is your identity, or what do you want your identity to be? What are your value systems, and how are you building and nurturing on that? And how are you being okay with your identity being completely different with the person standing right next to you? It's hard as adults, but it's something that if you consistently center yourself in and you feel good about, there's certain things that I'm like, I see and I celebrate people for, but I'm like, I would never want to do that. It doesn't come to me. I'm not jealous. I'm not whatever, because that doesn't align with my identity or how I want to show up. And so it's important that we take time to have those moments of, who am I? And here's the other thing when it comes to identity. One of the things I think we do a disservice to ourselves is we have an identity, let's say as a child or, growing up through our 20s. And as we get older, sometimes we're unable to realize that maybe your identity has shifted a little bit, who you are, what your values are, what you want. And so you're stuck here. Well, I said I was going to do this, and this is who I am, and this is how people know me as. and you've shifted a little bit. Maybe it's through life, through marriage, through kids, through work, and we're unable to shift that because we've been there so long, or because people have seen us that way for so long, and we're like, well, I can't do this or I can't do that. And you literally have to take control and have an identity shift. And you have to make people know, this is how I'm showing up. These are my new values. This is what I, want. And then you have to use that positive self-talk to walk into that. I think that's having the positive self-talk necessary on repeat to shift your identity is one of the hardest things, right? And to even build the identity itself. And for youth development, that's critical. Like you said, with the cards and things like that, I always tell people, if you're not doing notes, post-it positive notes that build that identity to help build youth, help to build that mindset, that's something so simple that you can do for them so they can read, they can look at, and they can start to say, this is how somebody else sees me in a positive way, and I can pour in and see myself that way. Because the other thing is all the negativity they might be getting online or from peers or from bullies, because then that becomes self-talk. We all have self-talk. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is it critical? So self-talk is happening all the time. What we want to do is be constantly thinking about, how can I make it as positive and as productive as possible? Not perfect, but as positive and as productive as possible. And so identity is where it starts, being able to do that and being centered in that. It'll just really get you grounded, and then you build everything else around that.
That's really powerful, because I remember when we started programs, I'm going to age myself here. Okay. Back in 2002, we launched programs in Los Angeles. We started off with 2 program sites. Now that organization, the After School All Stars, has over 70 sites across LA. And when we were this small, scrappy organization, and hiring passionate educators, we did something that was really strange for them to hear. We go, what do you want to design? What kind of experience do you want to build? Because so many of our educators come into programs thinking that they're just going to be plugged into a class or a program or an initiative. But it's something else when an educator comes on and they're asked that question, what do you want to build here? And oftentimes we go, what is your passion? What do you identify with? What are your values? And because of that foundation, the programs were able to really build really authentic and community-centered programming, because it began with folks in those communities having a voice and the opportunity to bring themselves into the programs that were being designed. So this idea of identity definitely connects to authentic quality programming. And one thing, Kam, especially as we look at girls in science and in math, just in the STEM fields, young ladies, girls in that world, what are some tips and tricks for programs to, when they hear girls come to them and go, I'm not really good at math, or don't really like science, or it's intimidating. When those things are said, what are ways that individuals and or programs can counter that and reframe that mindset? What are some tips?
Well, I think, the tips are immediately, and I always say, once you hear something, have a practice, statement that you can reply, especially when students say things. So when people say, I'm not good at math, I always say, no one is, but, you practice. No one starts out that way, but you can practice, or you can be. You're not good at math yet, the famous like pivoting of that. And then I think one of the other things to do is, when you're working with youth and you're in a space like that, especially when we talk about STEM education and STEAM, first of all, when I come to talk to people about STEAM, they think I'm about to break out and make them start learning coding, right? And I'm like, right, maybe, but not really, right? There's so much more there. And when I actually talk about STEAM, I talked about the practices. So solving problems like a scientist, tinkering like a technologist, engaging like an engineer, it's a mindset. So when you think about that, because you can go into the STEAM field, traditionally the roles that align, but you can also have a STEAM mindset and solve problems in any space. So even kids who come through these programs who don't want to go into STEM related fields, you can still solve problems with these methods, which are amazing, and accentuate like an artist and bring all these things in. Mizzen's the perfect example, right? You guys are operating on all these different fronts of how you show up, from artists to engineering to science to technology and math, and bringing these platforms forward, and even rebranding, right? That took some artist work in that to think about what you wanted to look like and show up. So I think expanding what they think STEAM is and how they can apply STEAM and why it's important. When people say they don't like things, I think that's I will take that. You know, I told my kids, I said, if you say you don't like basketball, I might take you out. But if you say you're not good at basketball, oh, we're doing basketball forever. Like I'm gonna lean way in, right? I can accept you not liking something because that's whatever, but I never want them to not do it because they think they can't be good. So what I would say if someone said they don't like something, I would say that's okay, but let's look at the values you can take away from this. So I always try to differentiate between like and somebody feeling like they're not good. I will talk about you not liking something much longer and lean in, then I will say you can't do it. That's when I'll be like, oh, we're doing this. We're going down this path.
There we
So
go.
when you're working with youth and things like that, what is it that they're putting in front of you that they can't do, and try to help them find a small win. Math, it can be hard. You know, science can be hard, coding can be hard. So how do you break down those concepts to get them to get a win? How do you, give them the tools that they need, give them the support they need, and break it down so that they can have a success and they can have an aha moment. And it might not be you teaching them. I can't tutor my own kids. I can work with all other kind of kids. So it might be saying, what are the resources that you need to be able to break down these concepts and you can get there? This is what I always jokingly say to my kids when they were younger and even now. I'm like, when I met you, you couldn't hold your head up. And I'm like, look at you now, right? So I'm like, you had
That's
no
cool.
neck control. So
Yeah.
I'm like, we all start out somewhere, we all have those things. But if you think about something as simple, but as huge as holding your neck up, you got to practice, you got to build those muscles and things like that. So when it comes to reading, when it comes to science, when it comes to getting to that space, no, you might not be as good as you want to be. And no, you might not start out when it's introduced understanding, but you can get there. And it's just going to take that memory. And so like, hey, will you work with me? Will you trust me? Will you know that I'll help you to get the resources to get to where you want to be? And I'm not saying you got to go into STEAM, but you can be good at it and you can use all the approaches and all of the ideas behind it to excel in so many things, especially in today's world. Like with just the interconnectivity of technology and science, it's everywhere. Everybody's in STEAM in my mind. Like we're all in there in different ways.
Yeah, no, awesome. And folks, I'm going to ask folks to come in. If you've got a question, something that's burning inside and you want to ask, come on in. I'm going to make a quick comment on something you said, Kam, which is, I love the approach of when you hear young people coming at you like I'm not good or I'm intimidated by, you start off by saying you empathize. You empathize and then you normalize that fear. Like it's okay. Like there are others who have that fear because our young people can often feel like they're the only ones who are not good at something. And my daughter, my youngest, my eighth grader, she has an older sister that she's been able to see grow into becoming more comfortable and more proficient in math and science. She had to go through her own journey, but the youngest is now seeing that it is possible. And when my youngest goes through that negative self-talk of like, I can't, my 17-year-old is saying, I was there once, right? So I was there once. So the idea of empathizing and then visualizing the possibilities. What if you just went after it? Yeah, okay, cool. You don't feel great about it. It's a little scary. But imagine if you actually just took that first step, right? What could happen? And so the idea of visualizing and empathizing and helping young people know it's common. Don't feel like you're the only one, right? I think getting them out of that sense of fear. So folks, I'll take a pause here to see if there are if anybody wants to come off mute. I had invited a friend of Mizzen's. I don't see her on here. Is it Lolly Aguilera Rico? I highly recommend you visit her on LinkedIn. Is it Lolly? If you can put her name down, Haley, in the chat. But she is an amazing example, Kam, of what you talked about in young ladies in the sciences. I met her as a seventh grade student back in 2007 or so, and she is now a graduate of Middlebury College in Vermont, microbio, and she's now working on liver disease research in youth, in children at Boston Children's Hospital, right? So her whole science journey began at a science fair. That's where I remember is at Lolly. And I have pictures of her hoisting her trophy of winning a science competition, which, by the way, the demonstration, I remember it clearly. It failed the first and second time, but it worked the third time. But she still was able, and her team were able to win the science competition. But she's an incredible example of that arc, that journey of going from, I'm going to dabble in this. I don't really know much about it to now having a career. Not that everyone will do that, but it's that first step that you
Absolutely.
talked about, that you talked about.
I love that. Yeah. And I did see that story. I love that. And I think it's so important. And then you talked about the failing the once and the twice. I'm like, that's the scientific method. You
That's
got to go in, you got to
right.
figure out, you got to do it again. I'm like, so again, making that comparison is it's important for adults too, but with youth, making that connection. Why is this important? Why does this matter? And then what does this relate to? So you can give an example that's not scientific, especially if they're not leaning into the STEM or STEAM, and say, well, it's like this. Have you ever failed at this? And then you had to try this again. And then they can say, okay, that makes sense because it's something that relates to them and they are connected to versus just trying to make it this only, only on one side. So making those outside connections are critical because we can apply the scientific method, we can apply STEAM related practices to everything. So sometimes to get them there, you got to take it out of the field and say, imagine this, imagine baking a cake, imagine looking like this. So making those connections are critical, and it helps them to open up their mind to, like you said, what if? Okay, it takes down their senses. I always say, like imagine having, a closed bottle and trying to, if I pour this water here, I'm gonna have a big mess, right? You gotta first open, them to possibilities, and then you can fill them up. If otherwise, you just got
Yeah.
water everywhere on the outside, you've done nothing, it's a big mess, everybody's frustrated. So it's first opening them up to wanting to receive that, and sometimes it's making a connection that's not
Yeah.
to what you're exactly talking about.
Obviously with Mizzen being a resource entity and service, we definitely want to put up or not put. I want to share with you a colleague of ours at Venture Lab has a great resource called the Entrepreneurial Mindset. Right, Scott Mann and the team over at Venture Lab, such great colleagues and great people. So look up Venture Lab, Entrepreneurial Mindset, and skill sets, and it'll talk about the very things that Kam mentions here, that there is a specific mindset that can cut across all types of situations in life, school, life, and career, that entrepreneurial mindset can serve you, even if you're not an entrepreneur. It could still be something that supports this idea of positive self-talk, a can-do mindset, the ability to face fear and failure and be able to overcome and have a great story to tell at the end,
And
right?
and I think I just want to point this out, like you said, the entrepreneur mindset, and as we talked about STEAM and related, it's like even if you don't go into this field okay, that's very clear that that's this. If you look up, right now the top 10 skills that employers are looking for in the workforce, it's a lot of soft or essential skills, however you want to call them. And I'm like, so to be able to label that for kids to say, no, this is a skill, this is something that people want. So to help them to identify and to connect with that, because I've seen plenty of job postings, they're like, we want somebody with an entrepreneurial mindset, because you're coming in, you're starting this new project. And even if you're working for someone else, you're still, going on this new endeavor, you're still creating this project. So it very much is this entrepreneurial style of working. And so it's very critical, like you said, to make that connection, to make the connection of how you think and how you show up. And that is broader than, oh no, you got to be an entrepreneur, you got to be this, or you got to be a science teacher. It's like, there's so much more, and again, making those connections to the endpoint. How are you going to use these things? Because they want to know, how am I going to use math? How am I going to do this, right? Sometimes it's the practices, sometimes it's the actual skills, and maybe it is making a connection to their workforce. What do you think you want to do when you grow up? Okay, let's align this, how this could help you, and the positive self-talk. Nobody wants to be in a meeting with someone who is, constantly shooting down every idea, negative, saying, oh, we're not going to be able to do this. Oh, Mizzen, we can't rebrand. We're not going to be able to that wouldn't have worked out. You wouldn't have gotten to where you've gotten to without saying, okay, well, this isn't going to work. This isn't, but maybe we could try this. You wouldn't have gotten to the innovation and the point you are, from the scrappy organization to this thriving entity with a new brand, if you weren't able to get through and say, okay, well, that didn't work. Let's try this. Let's do that. That's what positive self-talk is. It's telling that brain that, okay, we might need to try something different. We might need to look at it different. We might need a new person, to bring in a new idea and energy instead of not going to work, not going
Yeah.
to happen.
You know what? It's really interesting because I've been in conversations with individuals where there might be an idea, like an ideation session or brainstorming, and it's a little bit of like the improv mindset, which is folks can make statements, and sometimes we make statements to ourselves. like this will or that won't, or I don't know about, or what if, um, as opposed to asking questions,
Mhm.
right? So I think when you ask questions of yourself or others in a conversation around positivity, possibility, um, questions allow for growth and connection and even course correction if we feel like maybe we're being too ambitious. But when you make statements, it cuts off that kind of conversation. And it becomes about positioning yourself, who's right, who's wrong, when there's statements made rather than questions asked. So I think that's an important skill set for us to have, is to be able to ask questions, right? Um,
Absolutely.
I see that Mark Hausert is on. So Mark, good to see you, brother, on the line here. And I highly recommend the work happening in Missouri. I really give props to the state for their great work around entrepreneurship in young people. And so they're doing great work out there. And there is an element to the stuff that we talked about around positive self-talk. We talked about identity, but there's also brain-based components, brain-based science that backs it up. And I'll say this, Kim, and you kind of you tell me, one of the things that surprises me about our field is that we're not talking more about brain-based work,
Mhm.
right? What makes us tick? What makes our young people tick? Why do we behave the way we behave? Tell us a little bit about this connection between brain-based research and the idea of identity, positive self-talk, affirmations. What is the connection to brain science in this work?
You make an excellent point, and we talked about this before the call started. I think, we're operating very heavily, right, in the work because we're training, we're, talking about social emotional learning, things like that. I think one of the biggest missing components is just naming it and making the connection. This is all brain-based work, right? And so I think if we start saying that and making the connection, it gives it the validity and the connection. But our brain is an organ, and it has plasticity, which means it can be changed, it can be molded, and it's molded through practices. It's molded through studying. You learn things. It's molded through the way we speak to ourselves. If we're constantly stressed out, then there's hormones and things that are released that are depleting our energy, that are changing our brain, that are causing us to show up, differently. So it's, again, there's the things that we're doing and we're operating, we're doing the arts and we're having the hands-on, all of that stuff is meant for no other reason than to influence our brain. Like that is that is how we show up every day. Now, we don't say that, but that's what we're doing. We're trying to literally change people's minds so that they can think something and show up, operate, and act in a certain way. That's it, right? That's all that we're doing with everything. So to me, it's that we just have to start naming it and making that connection. The practices and things that we do on a daily basis all influence, whether positively or negatively, they influence our brain. That is the thing that is being shaped, that is literally being changed. And if you look at brain scans and the neurons of what's happening when you're speaking negatively, what's happening when you're speaking positively, there's a new study out that talks about a network in the brain. It's called the default mode network. And it's basically the brain at rest. So it's like daydreaming, self-reflection, like I'm just sitting here. And that's the part, right, that we really want to focus on is what have we trained our brain? How have we built these different synapses and neurons that are firing? Because all that's happening right now as I'm talking, that are going to be on the autopilot of positivity, or when my brain is at rest, it's going to be like, oh, you forgot this, your daughter was late for school, your house is a mess. It is. You didn't do laundry, this meeting, this project is behind. What is happening when we're in default mode, and everything that we're trying to do to build in youth development, to empower them, to build entrepreneurial mindset is to impact the brain. We don't talk about it as a society or in this space much, but that's all it is. Everything links back to that. We just aren't naming it and making that connection. There's no other reason for us to do the things that we're doing, but for to change someone's mind to positively, right? That's the end point. So everybody is doing brain work. We're just not naming
Hmm.
it as such.
That's crazy. But you saying changing your mind, it's a literal,
It is
it's
literal.
literally like changing the shape and the smoothness or the patterns within our brain. For folks who follow our work, I wrote a piece in November, and I mentioned this earlier, called how to, I think it's called How to Cultivate a Happier, Healthier, More Capable Brain. And Haley, if you could share that from our Mizzen Minute, because it was a point, Kam, in our growth and development as an organization where my brain literally like just was stuck. It was just, I felt like it was just broken. And I remember, I was getting on a plane after a board meeting to get to another thing. And I was on the phone and Janine's here. I was on the phone with Janine and Janine's like, yeah, afterwards we had that conversation. She's like, yeah, Carlos, you were like, think about all the things that you were doing at once. You were boarding, you were talking to me, you were reflecting, da da da, and all that because I just felt like my brain was just all the wires were crossed.
Mhm.
And so I think for us, it's important to think about how we think, what goes into our thought process. How do we make decisions? And I'll say this, one of the challenges about leadership is oftentimes we ascend to leadership roles or promoted to leadership roles, and we've not looked at how we process thought and decision making. And we can influence the culture and the feel of an organization with the way that we lead and how we think, right? So it's important to be a healthy leader through a healthy, happier, more capable brain. So, it was, so I totally jive with what you're talking about. We're down here to our last few minutes. So I want to make this last portion. So we talked about positive self-talk. We've talked about identity work. We talked about brain work. And so all these things are big, big concepts. And for some of us, it might be new. And so again, because we're in the business of resource development, what are some, I'd like to go through a little exercise called look, sound, and feel with you. So as an educator, we want to be able to position all that we've talked about in a way that's practical and applicable. So we want to first understand when we talk about positive self-talk, what does this sound like? So if I'm listening to this, what does it sound like when someone is doing positive self-talk, either with yourself or helping young people engage with that discipline in a learning space, in a classroom, on a field, in a gym, right? In a meeting? What is one example of what it sounds like?
So high level, it sounds like productive, questioning or statements that gets them to the end goal, wherever you're trying to get them, getting them moving to the possibility. It could be as simple as, you don't have to, you're not required to have it all figured out. That's an important one because kids still show up to school thinking they should know everything, which I'm like, wait, why would you be here? So really thinking about those productive statements and things like this. And this is one of the things I'll say about positive self-talk. And I just did a session in California this weekend, is that we don't often make it intentional in our spaces, or we often put it over the side. So you said the classroom, the field, the this and there, positive self-talk has a place everywhere. And I say even in the grocery store, especially with inflation. And so I think that it's important that you don't put it off on the side and you bring those statements in. And again, a lot of times you're doing this, you're doing the naming, you're doing the cheering, you're doing the coaching. It's about the labeling. And then it's also identifying the connection to the impact. If you say this, it's going to make you maybe think of different possibilities. It's going to make you, self-forgive and things like that. So I think when you think about positive self-talk, again, it's not always these cheery, like everything's awesome statements. It's a productive statement or questioning that allows you to get from stuck to unstuck. It allows you to get from here to there, whatever your end goal is. So that's what you should be listening for, but that's what you should be modeling, as well, in an intentional, everyday way in all of the spaces, and naming it as such, so that they start to make it this connection of that's what this is, as opposed to like, oh, you only do positive self-talk when you're doing affirmations and, on a yoga retreat. Like, no, this is a part of our daily life. And this is what this looks like. And you can bring in some brain science. You can show a brain, a picture of a brain of what it looks like, stressed and negative versus stressed and positive, and have a visual image like that to connect it to.
Great segue to, okay, great. That's what it sounds like. So what does it look like? If I were to visit a program, a classroom, a meeting, and I walk in and I'm seeing it, what does it look like, positive self-talk?
It looks like people failing and getting up and figuring it out. It looks like people being frustrated and reaching out for help. One of my favorite quotes is, don't say I can't, say I need help. It looks like people understanding that it might take a little bit of time. I've seen this pop up in the chat several times. It looks like hearing the word yet. So blah, 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 I can't yet. I can't, you can say I can as long as you attach that yet to it. But it looks like this space where people are literally embracing, and somebody else said it, accepting their failures and being like, okay, let me go at it again. So when we think about operating in the STEM and STEAM perspective, as a scientist, you're constantly tinkering, you're constantly figuring out, you're constantly putting, solutions or different things together to get to your end point. No scientist comes up with this product or this invention on the first, go round. There's a lot of things that go into it. So it looks like that STEAM at work where people are okay with having those failures and then stepping back and identifying, okay, this is what went wrong. What if, like you said, I changed this? So it's that constant, regrouping and starting over and being open to the possibility. That's what you hear and that's what you see during homework time, during a basketball game where you don't win. Well, how can I get better? How can I practice on my shot as opposed to the losing team going off and, yelling, fighting, or doing something that's on the opposite? You want them to be, hey, I want to be good like that. What could I do? That's positive self-talk. Or we'll practice your shots more. Okay, can you show me? It looks like that ability to constantly be, getting better and being open to the option of having that option to do better every day or every moment.
Awesome, awesome. So we went through what does it sound like? What does it look like? So it's done. We've gone through the experience. Now we're sitting and we're reflecting and what does it now feel like to look back? What does that look like? What does that feeling look like or feel like?
To me, I cannot imagine living my life, especially with the life that I have with the kids, with the workspace and the things that I do without having that as a center. Because at the end of the day, even after big disasters, I'm talking like big, money losses, and contracts and construction failures and stuff with the kids. At the end of every day, I have this sense of peace that's doing that questioning that I can't imagine if it was anywhere else. So like, okay, that didn't work. I looked at that. I can compare it to something else. To me, it creates this sense of peace and understanding that there's an opportunity to show up and try again, to do again, that constant reiteration of constant process improvement, if you will. And it just puts you in a state of, okay, how am I going to show up and look at this again tomorrow? How am I going to add what I learned today and what I went wrong today and pivot, for tomorrow? So to me, it's not perfection, but it's a state of peace that is priceless to me, priceless.
Awesome. Sound like, look like, feel like. Thank you for that breakdown as we spent some time really looking at these big concepts and big ideas behind positive self-talk and how that connects to identity work, to how young ladies see themselves in science and STEM, to even our own growth and development as leaders in a way to have a healthier, more a whole and more and healthier working environment, culture, individual mindset around the work that we do. Folks, thanks for joining us. We hope this was helpful, meaningful, and that it brought some ideas and some rejuvenation to the work that you all are doing out there in the field. So appreciate you all. Thank you, Mizzen team.